Hi there, I'm Dylan, and today we'll be going over Lab 4, Observing Oscillations. In this lab, we'll examine a spring mass system swinging on an arc while oscillating. The purpose of this lab is to predict the motion of the spring mass system while using the energy principle, Newton's second law, and the formulas for spring force and spring potential energy. The experimental data was similar enough to the glow script model to justify the energy principle. In this experiment, we will label the system as the mass, spring, and earth, with initial conditions being the initial position, found through the tracker app, the initial length of the spring, found in the pre-lecture video, the acceleration due to gravity, and the initial velocity. Since the system is at rest initially, we will use the concept of static equilibrium to find the relaxed length of the spring. However, we must find the time and the spring constant first, so we will find the time by finding the average of some of the times where the spring mass is at its lowest position. Then we will use the period of oscillation formula to solve for the spring constant. Now that we have our conditions, we can use the energy principle to conclude that the total change in energy will be zero, since the system is the mass, spring, and earth. Other formulas we will use will be that of the spring potential energy, gravitational potential energy, and kinetic energy. These will be used in the glow script model to model the predicted motion that we will see later. Alright, here's the tracker video of the experiment. Highlighted in red are the lines I modified in the glow script to run the data that we'll see in the next slide. Recall the motion of the energy formulas being used here. In the graph to the left, the change in energy in joules is modeled as a function of time. The blue line represents the change in kinetic energy, the orange line represents the change in total energy, the green line represents the change in potential spring energy, and the red line represents the change in gravitational potential energy. The graphs to the right model the x and y positions of the spring mass system as a function of time, with the red lines being the experimental data and the blue lines being the data from the glow script model. As seen with the graphs to the right, the experimental data is very similar, but not exact to that of the glow script data. Some errors that could be taken into account could be calibration and tracking errors while operating the tracker app and the drag force that the glow script does not factor in its model. So what does this mean? Is the energy principle justified? Yes. By looking at the graphs, the change in energy, denoted by the orange line, remains at zero throughout the entire duration of the experiment. Another thing to note is that the amplitudes of the change in spring energy, denoted by the green line, and the change in gravitational energy, denoted by the red line, cancel out. As a result, we can deduce that energy is conserved and that there are no outside forces that make the change in energy zero, or rather greater than zero. Looking back at the tracker graphs, the spring mass system has a differing period of oscillation in the x direction as opposed to the y direction. In the x direction, the period of oscillation was found to be 1.519 seconds, while the period of oscillation in the y direction was found to be 1.456 seconds. Thus, the periods are different, and the x and y directions will each have their own spring constant and spring force value, because those variables are dependent on the period of oscillation. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.